what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you have nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Welcome back to Seeds of Revolution. Today we have a really fantastic episode. We got two incredible activists that we're talking to. Clifton Ariwagete, he is a filmmaker, an activist, and pot advocate. And Frank Lopez. Frank is a troublemaker, formerly of Submedia and now with Amplifier Films. And Clifton and Frank are here to talk to us about A Red Road to the West Bank, an Indigenous journey of resistance and solidarity, a documentary the two of them have been working on for quite some time now. So Frank, Clifton, welcome to Seeds of Revolution.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'd like for you two gentlemen just to introduce yourselves, tell our audience, give them a little brief summary of who you are, how you got involved in a life of left-wing activism and anarchism, and maybe introduce A Red Road to West Bank, and we can talk more about the movie.
Well, I'll start.
Yeah,
I'll
Clifton,
start.
if you can go first, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I've been involved in activism since about 17, I guess. It all started with the events that led to the Oka crisis in the late 80s and early 90s, and I had gotten involved in the resistance against the development of the pine forest into a golf course and luxury home development. So that's what I started on was that. I started working in grassroots organizing to occupy the pine forest, ensure that the developments didn't go through in the pines. Hold on, I just lost you there for a minute. So in that resistance, I started getting involved with different people, with different political movements, right, to understand things. So that laid the groundwork for me getting more involved in activism, because for me, my activism extended only towards my community and what we're doing is as far as resisting development of the pine forest in Ganasadagan. After 1990, given all the events that happened in 1990 and all the people that we encountered, I started developing a little more of a mindset, a political mindset that led me to where I am today. Going on from that point in my life, I did a lot of traveling, a lot of working all around the United States, doing iron and construction work and meeting different people in the working class environments, which led me to go into university. And at university, again, Concordia in Montreal, being a hotbed of activism, I was introduced to different activist groups, in particular, one that struck me with a lot of interest is the Palestinian solidarity groups that existed on campus. And I knew a little bit about Palestine. I wasn't very in tune to it. But then I started to learn. The more I learned, the more I realized how familiar what was happening to Palestine was to my narrative and what we went through as a people in Canada under secularism. That in a nutshell is where I got my start, where I led to this point in my life. Then after that, I guess Palestine, it consumed a lot of my activism after that point.
Thank you. Frank, how about you? How did you get your start in this wild and crazy life of activism and fighting against the man?
How can I shorten this? My dad was always concerned with decolonization of Puerto Rico, possibly in a way that most people wouldn't consider decolonization. He felt that the best way for the island to achieve equality was for Puerto Rico to become a state of the United States. Now, this is something I don't agree with, but there's a certain logic to his argument because we are U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico, not by choice, but when we're born there, that's what it's assigned to us. And we don't have the right to vote for president. We don't have the right to have senators or congresspeople. And the island can be used for whatever the U.S. wants if they feel like it. Like they can expropriate land to set up military bases, for instance. And so, as a result of my dad's work later on, particularly in media, he started a TV station in Puerto Rico. I became a little more politically conscious. And in the 1990s, ironically, I became a pot activist, and I did a project called Hempcyclopedia to try to propagate the idea that this plant was very beneficial, not just for the medicinal properties, but for industrial. But I was also particularly interested in the punitive aspect of marijuana laws and how people were going to jail for smoking a plant or selling a plant. But it was not until the attacks of September 11 happened that I became further radicalized. It was there that I joined the anti-war movement, and it was there that I met anarchists for the first time with the Independent Media Center in Atlanta, which is part of the Independent Media movement worldwide. And ever since then, I have destroyed any chances of a career, and I'm very happy to do so, to destroy my career for and my reputation for a good cause.
And it seems like the good cause that you both are pursuing these days with great passion and ingenuity is a new documentary called Red Road to the West Bank. I was hoping if you could tell us a little bit about this film, and then we'll get into the details of what it's about and how it's going so far. But how did this film come about? What is its birth story?
Well, I went to Palestine in 2016, and I had an intention of filming a very short documentary film called the Marhaba Palestine. And basically, I wanted to have people putting a human face on being Palestinian. So I had a lot of people go up to the camera and say hello from Palestine, right? So it started out very simplistic. And when I was there, it happened to be during the Nakba commemorations. So they always have demonstrations about the Nakba and so on. So while I was there, I filmed, and it really morphed into something different. And I knew at that point that I couldn't do that original documentary, that had to be something more. However, I had like really like a almost like a mental crisis about what was happening, what I was doing with my life at that moment. So I put everything on hold, and I took care of my stuff, and it sat on my hard drive for a while. And I always had the intention of putting it out as a very small, easy film to do. Then all the events of October 7th happened. And I said to myself, I have to put that stuff out, and I have to talk about colonization and what it means, and how we're at this position right now in history where we're witnessing a genocide unfold before us. So I have to put something together to understand it for myself, but also to explain it to others, the mechanics of genocide and where genocide starts from. And that, here in North America was like one of the biggest examples of colonial genocide to occur on a continual basis. And how do they compare? So that's the question I asked myself. How do these two genocides compare? How do those two colonizations compare? And how can I make those links? So that would lead me to where we are today with the film, with Frank, to make those links, to try and make an explanation, to have indigenous people and other people understand our role and what's going on currently in Palestine.
So is the film about what's happening in Palestine, or is it more about drawing parallels between the Palestinian experience of colonialism and genocide and the indigenous Canadian experience of colonialism and genocide? Or is it about both?
It's about both, but it's more in the latter,
Hmm.
because there are a lot of stories coming out right now that are being the narration of that are being done by people experiencing it, which has more validity in my opinion. So I'm not going to go there. I could talk about it, but I'll talk about most of the colonization aspect of it all. And there's different facets to that. It's not just an issue of colonization. It's like trying to get into the nitty gritty of what is it like. There's mythologies attached to colonization. There's mythologies attached to being an American. You know, being a Canadian. But I'll focus a little bit more on American because it's very mythological how we present history in the United States to Americans. So the mythology is Plymouth Rock, Mayflower, George Washington, the founding fathers. So that's an important mythos to have that as a foundation of being an American. Then if you look back and look into Israel's history, it's in a similar vein, right? So you have the mythos, you have Ben Gurion, you have all these other people who fought like they did in the American Revolutionary War. So they had the 1948 the Nakba. So they had their own mythology surrounding that, also that foundation of Israel. So I talk about in the film about how what Americans consider the heroic president George Washington, we call him Radinu Wadega, the village destroyer.
Hmm.
So that's our name for president. So I'm exploring that aspect of it. And in the film, I clearly call it out as it is, that as Ganyokahaga people, as indigenous people, particularly as Haudenosaunee people, we are the first victims of the American dream. And the American dream is continuing now in the colony of Israel.
Frank, it strikes me that a lot of what Clifton was saying applies to the Puerto Rican experience as well. The founding mythos of Puerto Rico, at least from the American perspective, the idea that it was the glorious American Navy that liberated Puerto Rico from the oppressive Spanish. But the reality obviously is quite different. Are there parallels that you've experienced, that you've felt, like what Clifton is describing between the indigenous Canadian experience and the experience of Palestinians? Does that also apply to some of what you and what Puerto Ricans have been going through for, more than 100 years now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you consider that Puerto Rico was invaded in 1898 during the Spanish-American War, our great liberator did not give us citizenship until 1917. And for people who know history, that date is when First World War started, and so they needed fodder for the infantry. And so, in order to have soldiers, they gave Puerto Ricans citizenship so they could go and fight for the U.S. Empire. It's also interesting to note that not to get into the nitty gritty of history, but at that particular time, Spain was a very weakened empire. It didn't really have the military firepower that it had in the century before. And so the United States basically walked in and took Puerto Rico. And Puerto Ricans were very disenchanted with Spain. They did not, at this point, have a Spanish identity. They identified as Puerto Ricans because essentially Spain forgot them, and they were poor, and they were gearing up to try to become independent. And so the United States, it was timing, came at this particular moment. But yeah, the United States was been extremely brutal to Puerto Ricans. Everything from medical experiments to violently putting down the pro-independence movement of the island, to forcibly relocating people, to build military bases, using beautiful natural sites as places of military exercises and target practice. Things like testing Agent Orange and napalm on a rainforest because the foliage is similar to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. I mean, these are just the types of things that we experienced and continue to experience. Basic inequality when it comes to poverty. Puerto Rico is on the lowest rung of the United States. Also, like I mentioned before the interview started, like we don't get to vote for president, we don't get to vote for senators or Congress people. So yeah, we're basically the oldest standing colony right now. If you consider 1493, when Columbus set foot in Puerto Rico, as the beginning of that process. And so I think one of the main things that we're trying to do with the film is to talk about how colonization is alive and well as a process. Like a lot of people think about colonization as something from the history books, and no, it's a process. And in the case of Puerto Rico, is over 500 years, literally, of colonization, 520 something years, and in Ganagahiga territory and Clifton's People's territory, it was a little bit later, and now we're seeing Palestine has not even been like over a little bit of 100 years of the process of colonization, maybe in an accelerated way. But just to show that this is ongoing, we're witnessing it, and all of us are. And when I say all of us, us Puerto Ricans, like Clifton and indigenous people and Palestinians, we're all sort of like experimental instruments in these processes.
Clifton, something you said about when you first started reading about and learning about Palestine in college really struck me. And you were talking about first noticing the commonalities between the Palestinian struggle and the indigenous struggle. And I was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates's The Message, which is a book that he recently came out with, and a big chunk of the book is about his experience traveling to the West Bank a couple years ago. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, he writes that when he landed, he looked around the West Bank and he looked at the border walls and he looked at, the signs saying no, Israelis only, and the roads that are only for Israelis. And Coates writes that when he landed, he looked around and he instantly recognized this. He said, I've seen this before. This is segregation. This is the same horrific, oppressive process that murdered and kept my people down in North America for hundreds of years. And now it's doing the same thing in Palestine. And I'm hopeful you both maybe can talk a little bit more about the commonalities of that process of colonization, and specifically to push back against the narrative. And Ta-Nehisi Coates was talking about this, that this is what's happening now in Palestine is a very complicated problem. It's how we shut down the narrative. Oh, the Palestinians and the Israelis have been fighting for years. It's a complicated problem. And Ta-Nehisi Coates says, no, it's not. I've seen this before. This is colonization. This is segregation. This is actually very simple. And I'm hopeful that you two can talk more about the sort of terrible simplicity of what the Palestinians are currently experiencing, what that has in common with whether it's indigenous Canadians, Puerto Ricans, people around the world.
Well, I had the same impression as Ta-Nehisi Coates did, because I felt very familiar. Felt like I was in a large reserve. Really, a large reserve with the changes being that people speak Arabic, and there are more people than on my reserve, but the same dynamic playing out. So over policed, underprotected, the poverty. You can see on people the frustration. I remember going at one point, going around and looking at the businesses and seeing that the opportunity has to be created by themselves. There's nobody allowing anything else to go on there but themselves. There's that resilience of their community. And I have to say, I've never in my life experienced more resilient people than Palestinians. I can really take my hat off to their resilience and their tenaciousness when it comes to standing on their own too. Uh, it felt very, very familiar. It felt very homey. I think for me, one of the things that I had read that had a extreme impact on me prior to becoming more of an activist during my transition, I guess from not knowing to knowing, was reading Mahmoud Darwish's The Penultimate Statement of the Radiant into the White Man. And upon getting to Palestine, walking around amongst Palestinian people, once they find out I'm indigenous from North America, the narrative totally changes, and like we're part and parcel of being the same body at that point. And there's a understanding and a love that came from that too. Oh, you're a Red Indian. It says you're welcome. You're like us. Was the
Mm.
second thing out of their mouths, and that you'll be telling them about us. I said, yes, definitely. That's my duty. Um, eating with them. It reminded me very much of how we grew up in indigenous homes. When somebody comes in, you offer them food right away, and you offer them the hospitality and the welcomeness, and that's what I got. And a very humbling experience. And on top of that was having people give me what little they had. That's a very humbling experience, and it made me feel very connected. And that's the same way I had growing up. We didn't have much. My grandmother used to always say, somebody doesn't have, you always give. Even if you don't have enough, you have more than enough to share. And that's the feeling I got over there. Very, I felt like that community was very much something that I could relate to.
Frank, do you have any thoughts about that experience of commonality and the commonality of different groups around the world when they're faced with, colonial oppression?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak about the Palestinian issue the way Clifton has, because I have not had the pleasure of visiting that territory. But certainly, coming here to Canada was very instructive to me, just because it was the first time, really, that outside Puerto Rico, I heard people speak about colonialism and anti-colonialism. In Puerto Rico, this is very much like a daily conversation. This is the thing that drives local politics. It's like, how do we decolonize the island? Even though us ourselves as Puerto Ricans are a product of colonization, right? The indigenous populations of the island were completely exterminated by the Spanish. We pretty much see our identity as a mix between Taino, African, and European. But that said, seeing indigenous people in Canada asserting their identity and saying, like, we're still here. This territory is ours. This is our land. It reminded me a lot of us on the island, and it really it made it such an easy transition for me to go from the States, where nobody really talks about that stuff, to joining like the radical scene in Vancouver at the time, and joining the anti-Olympic movement, whose slogan was "No Olympics on Stolen Native Land." And there was definitely like an affinity there, that was instantaneous, just because we were all aware that our fight was current, that our our enemy was massive, but recognizing that the land where we are, the land that is our home, is being taken by somebody else.
Clifton, what was most surprising to you when you visited Palestine?
The militarization of the border, the wall. Like I've read it, I've seen it, pictures of it, but actually to experience the checkpoints, experience the oppression was galling, to say the least. Um, the wall. I don't know how many times I filmed that godforsaken thing. It's so imposing. It's so draconian. It's hard to put it in words. You have to experience it, and all the signage that's around too that tells people that they're supposed to be apart. It left an impression on me, and the fact that Palestinians have a card, and I look in my wall and I have the same identity card. Them it says they're Palestinian. In me it says I'm Mohawk, and it tells them what percentage of Mohawk am I. So in North America, we're the only people that have to carry around a card that denotes our racial identity. That's the form of apartheid that I'm familiar with, because it comes from Canada, and that I've experienced over there. Also, the export that Canada exported to South Africa, South Africa exported to Israel. So I experienced that. I seen it. I felt it, and it felt very, very eerily familiar. And again, I'll go into that whole disgusting nature of the police state of Israel and the infrastructure that they put up to maintain their oppressive structures within Palestine. It was awe-inspiring in a really disgusting way. Um, and it was scary because you know that every little move you made was recorded.
Mm.
They had these drones like on hilltops. I was in a place called Aida refugee camp, and on the other side of the wall there are hills that go above the wall, and on top of those hills are these big cylinders, and on top of them there are these electronic information gathering devices, cameras and microphones and motion sensors and stuff like that. They reminded me of in Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back on the planet of Hoth, the Imperial droid that's going
Hmm.
around and
Yeah.
it's searching for the rebel camp. It looked like that, and that's exactly what it looked like. And because it looked almost like a tank turret on top of that, and just the levels of surveillance and of militarization of the whole area was shocking. Like there's so many different police. They all different uniforms. So those are municipal police. These are border security police. That's IDF. This is internal security. That's another security. It's like there's so many different police forces at play. That's definitely not a free country. It's very much a oppressive regime that I walked into, and it felt like it.
Why, given that physical reality, why does there remain such a hesitancy on the part of people, a lot of people, let's say over 30 especially, the younger generation is changing rapidly because they have access to media firsthand, or they know how to use their phones to get access to media firsthand. But for people over 30, there seems to be such a hesitancy to identify apartheid as apartheid. And whether it's the media or whether it's just normal people, jump through these really incredible rhetorical loop-de-loops to deny what is so obvious, what you so clearly and concisely stated as the physical structure of apartheid. And yet there's, millions of gallons of ink spilled every day trying to convince people, and I think successfully in many situations, that no, what you are seeing with your own eyes is not actually what you're seeing with your own eyes. Why has that been so successful, do you think?
It's called Gentile guilt. So Gentile guilt extends to what happened to in the Holocaust, right? Um, so that Gentile guilt extended its way all the way to 1948 and the creation of Israel. They did nothing. The West did nothing to prevent what happened to the Jewish people in Europe. They didn't accept any refugees. In a lot of ways, they contributed to what happened at the end of it all. The people dying in those camps are all guilty of allowing that to happen. They knew it was happening. They did nothing to stop it. So Gentile guilt plays a big role in that. And also, that generation was inundated with a lot of information on what happened in the Second
Yeah.
World War and what happened to the Jewish people in camps, and were browbeaten with that. And the same goes with the side of Zionists, right? Who are brought up with that idea and that notion that Zionism is good, the state of Israel is good, that we have to take care of them. They can only go that one place. So that cycle of brainwashing went on and on and on, and it took a mountain of effort to start to reverse that ideology with younger people to say like, no, this isn't what it is. The people who are claiming to be victims are not victims; they're oppressors, and that they're using a tragedy to oppress other people in the same manner that they were oppressed. So that took a long time. Like I can safely say now that we can have this open conversation today without really fear of repercussions in a lot of ways that we couldn't do 20 years ago or 30 years ago for that matter. We're very unpopular. I remember going to those first little rallies. It was like 10 of us at Concordia protesting in a mezzanine about Palestinian rights and being such an unpopular voice. And things started to change and started to move forward after a while. Then they waned. And then now October 7th happened and everything's in the spotlight. Everybody's talking about there's not a person in the world that doesn't know what's going on in Palestine. But again, the guilt prevents people from doing something,
Mm.
because again, they're thinking, well, if we go against them, are we being anti-Semitic? And it's been weaponization of anti-Semitism, right? Of the notion of anti-Semitism. But at the point now, people are getting so fed up with that accusation, they're saying, fine, accuse me of being anti-Semite. I'll be whatever you need me to be, but I'm still going to keep talking.
Well, and it's a lot harder from my perspective. It's become harder to make that accusation when so many pro-Palestinian protesters are Jewish. You know, Jewish Voices for Peace has done an incredible job organizing the Jewish anti-apartheid response, and so that really truly rings hollow, as you were saying.
It's a hard sell because, I understand. I understand the mentality a little bit too of the Zionist side of things. There's a desire to have your own space. I
Mm.
get it. I get it. But that's not your space to have. I understand too. There's a lot of trauma and pain that was never addressed for these people. They were never allowed to heal. So that's part of it too. It's not just a simple question of this is good and this is bad. No, it's a lot more complicated on both sides of that coin. But at the end of the day, what we see is black and white. There's a genocide happening, and it's black and white. One side's killing one side F-16s, the other side has only tents.
The
So
history
there's
might be complicated, but the day-to-day reality today is very simple.
it's a funny one. It's complicated and not at the same time.
Yeah.
And that I guess in a nutshell would be how you would describe colonization.
Yeah.
Complicated and not. You know what I mean? It's a very odd thing sometimes.
Frank, same question for you, and especially given the Puerto Rican context, I'm just guessing, but I would bet that if you asked 90% of U.S. citizens, they would deny that the United States even has colonies. Like the idea of owning Puerto Rico as a colony and disenfranchising Puerto Rico, and the current nature of colonialism is not even in, the vast majority of Americans' consciousness. And if you made them confront it, their brains would short circuit. Why is that? Why do we have such an amazing ability to deny what is right in front of our face?
Well, I also think that the propaganda mechanisms have gotten more sophisticated, and
Yeah.
I think that the way that history is being rewritten quickly, it used to take years for people to erase historical memory. Now it just seems to be in a matter of days, hours, or even minutes. When you look at Trump's rewriting of what happened on January 6th, just to name an example, it's incredible, and a lot of people will see that day as a day of freedom fighters, for example. Most people in the United States don't even know about Puerto Rico. I went to college in the United States, and a lot of people ask me, how did I get there? Did I take a boat? Did I come by canoe? Did we have television? So a lot of the ignorance about this is just the institutions. It's in their best interest to keep people ignorant about the atrocities that their own government commits. And I think that I think once people have their awakening, it's just kind of, it's hard to unsee.
Mhm.
When you consider that in Puerto Rico, we know that there was colonization in Puerto Rico. We're taught that the indigenous people were massacred. And then you kind of look at the United States, and most people, maybe they'll know that the island was a war trophy, but also that, and this is a narrative with all colonized nations, is that they're doing us a favor by taking us over. I mean, it happened in Turtle Island, and it happened in Africa.
The white man's burden.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And they'll tell you, oh, Puerto Rico is the most economically advanced country in Latin America. And that sort of rings hollow, because essentially we're joined at the hip of the United States. We cannot exist without the United States, because they have made it impossible for Puerto Rico to do trade, for Puerto Rico to be food sovereign. They completely took over all the land when they first invaded to produce sugarcane, and all the subsisting agriculture that was on the island was practically wiped out. So again, I think that there's two things happening here. One, is like this is just like a long time historical amnesia of what's the colonial attitudes and the imperial attitudes of the United States doesn't really get taught to people in the country, but also that the historical memory gets manipulated with the quickness, with something that's it seems tried to talk about Orwell, but this is basically what he spoke about with Newspeak and the novel 1984, right? Like how day to day they rewrote history to serve their means. And so who knows? I mean, who knows what who knows if Israel is going to be on the side of the United States in the future. For the time being, that's what the architects of the propaganda are putting out there.
Clifton, have you been back to Palestine or spoken to anybody in Palestine since October 7th and heard what they're currently going through?
I have not been back. I'm persona non grata in Israel, which I'm proud of.
Was that because of your trip in 2016?
Yes. So I got a notice that I'm persona non grata from them.
What was the reason? Just because you were making a?
They didn't make any reason. They don't need a reason.
So
It said, your activities and where you were and who you were consorting with. And I did like a 4-hour interrogation leaving the country. Took me half an hour to get in, 4.5 hours to leave. A naked interrogation in the Tel Aviv airport.
They stripped you naked and interrogated you for 4 hours?
They took stuff out of my bag. I had packed old hard drives that were corrupted SD cards. They took all of that, and they took T-shirts. I had T-shirts of Handala, which is the cartoon character of the Palestinian with his back turned to the world, with his pants have patches and holes in them. They're so poor. So they took that shirt because I guess that's a terrorist threat, that shirt. They took a couple of posters I had. And I had this beautiful little, I hope I can find it because it'd be cool for the film. It's a little postcard that was in my bag with a cartoon Ben Gurion on it and telling me that my bag was inspected for my security and my safety by the Israeli Airport Authority. It was a very cute little bag. After they went through everything and they stole all that stuff out of my bag because they don't want to talk about it. You touched on a subject matter about just knowledge and about having historical knowledge of things and how they don't want you to know, and they don't want you to know about things. In Israel either, they don't want you to know. They don't want their own population to know. They want to keep people ignorant. So the dumber you are, the less you're willing to stand up and do anything about it. And there's been a dumbing down of society for the past 40 years, and it pays off in the end. You get things like January 6th because people don't know and don't want to know. They get to the point where they don't know and they don't care to know. And we're at that point. And because knowledge is power and knowledge hurts. It hurts those in power. When people are knowledgeable about the situations going on around them in the world and explains to them what's happened to them at the current time. So we're in a very interesting time right now. We have people who understand and see, and others who want to remain ignorant.
Have you spoken to anybody in the film since October 7th?
Yes, I have. I've maintained contact with quite a few people. One of the main interviewees in my film, Rahab, I'm in contact with her often. We have some follow-up interviews to do with her. One of my friends who I didn't interview, but I had a very interesting experience with, his name is Aladdin, and I met him in Bethlehem, and we had an interesting little meeting when I went there, and he found out I was Mohawk, and he got very happy the fact that an Indian was there, Red Indian. Again, the whole story of being relating to each other in that manner. So we made friends. We had lunch with him, and he had invited some of his family to meet me, and we hit it off. And after October 7th, he reached out to me and told me that he's been having a hard time. He runs a boutique that sells gifts in Manger Square in Bethlehem, and there were no tourists that year.
Yeah.
So I made arrangements to have him be able to sell some of his stuff. in Canada. So I facilitated an arrangement with a friend of mine in Victoria to bring in some of his stuff and to sell it and to raise money, to raise like $40,000 for him and his family, which I'm very proud of that. The fact that I was able to help them do that, and the kefiyas that we have right now, we're doing our part of fundraising for the film are from his shop. So what he does is he collects arts and crafts from the local artisans around. He's like a broker for them. So I'm glad to be able to do that. Hopefully, we fed some babies.
One of the biggest pieces of misinformation that I've seen coming out of the current genocide in Gaza is that it's all about Hamas, when we all know that even if you take Gaza out of the picture, what the people in the West Bank have experienced since October 7th has been horrific. People being murdered, people's homes being invaded by settlers and police, children being murdered, illegal land confiscations. Have your friends spoken to you specifically about how much more difficult things have been in the West Bank since October 7th?
Yes, male friends from the West Bank have told me that they don't leave the house. They don't leave the house because they're afraid to leave the house. If they leave the house, they could face harassment and possibly get shot by the Israeli forces that are constantly present in the West Bank. Um, I have another friend who says that it's getting difficult to find food in some parts of the West Bank. It's difficult just to move around because my friend Rahab was saying just to leave her place in Jenin that she has to take an extra long detour because they destroyed the roads leading out of the community, and all the infrastructure has been uprooted by bulldozers. So it's a very difficult life they're living right now in the West Bank, and they're living in fear. Like my friend Aladdin, he tells me that he smokes more now than he ever did. Like, I talked with him on a FaceTime call, and I watched him within a span of an hour smoke about 8 cigarettes. So he says, I'm constantly nerved. He doesn't feel comfortable. They feel precarious, and gratefully so. I mean, it was never comfortable to begin with. It's even worse over now.
Do your friends think that this is the prelude to outright annexation?
Yes, they're feeling that. They're feeling that things are going to happen in a very bad way.
It's truly awful. Sorry, my brain is to even contemplate that it's going to go that far, which all signs point to it going that far, which is just truly terrible. What lessons can Canadian viewers of your film, what lessons do you hope they draw? Or maybe lessons is not the right word. How do you hope they feel about Canadian history and the Canadian Indigenous experience and Canadian colonization? How do you hope that they feel about those concepts after they've watched Red Road to West Bank?
Well, you know they they have this idea that it's not their fight, that they're not involved in this fight, and that what happens is Israel and Palestine doesn't concern Canadians, but it does, because the biggest contributors to the creation of Israel were Canadians, and one of the biggest contributors of that was the Brofman family out of Montreal, and the Canadian Parliament did a lot to prop up the state of Israel in 1948. You know, there's even a village in Israel that was totally destroyed during the Nakba, and all it remains is rocks. And it's called Canada Park.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's done by the Jewish National Fund. They do that. They take money from Canada, and they take taxpayer money to uh to create parks like that in Israel. So Canada has a large part to play in that, and they're part and parcel of the issue that's happening in that country, and have been from the beginning. So there's a part to play. Our tax dollars are still going towards that. Your tax dollars in Canada go towards funding that country. More, not as much as the United States, but still some.
There's have you heard the word tzedakah, Clifton? You ever heard that Hebrew word?
Tzedakah, no.
Yeah, so you were telling me about the Jewish National Fund Canada Park, and I'm not sure a lot of people who aren't Jewish know this, but when you grow up being Jewish, one of your obligations is to give tzedakah, which is it's basically charity, like giving money to help the people in need. And growing up, whenever I went to synagogue, there is a little box for tzedakah.
Okay.
And it's a box, and it says right on the box, and I'm sure this is the case with most synagogues in Canada and the States today, and it says on the box, Jewish National Fund. And
Mhm.
all the money you put into that box goes into exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
And it's really heartbreaking to me to think about my 10-year-old self putting tzedakah into that box, thinking that I was doing something good and pure and noble for underprivileged people, when even something as small as that little gesture contributes to this overarching structure of colonialism.
It's so sad because there are so many Jewish people that understand the suffering that they went through, and that were being bamboozled in another without a better word to use, and the way they use Judaism to be an oppressive tool, it's just beyond belief. It's terrible. Like I empathize, and I empathize with both sides, and I struggle. As being an indigenous person, being somebody who's survived, who's a descendant of survivors of genocide, and being indigenous and being a person who has been dispossessed. So on both sides of that coin, I understand. We feel that, right? We feel that the Jewish suffering is something we understand. Also, we also understand the Palestinian suffering. So I think as indigenous people, we're well positioned to talk about this, and maybe who knows, maybe help you guys find a road to peace too with that. And because it's heartbreaking at the end of the day to see what's happening.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to see who's perpetrating it too.
Well, I know we're running up against an hour, and I don't want to detain you. I know
Yeah.
you're too busy, gentlemen. Any final thoughts on the movie? Anything you'd like our listeners to take away with from this interview? Anything they can do to help support your efforts?
Yeah. For people who don't know, making films is a long and expensive process. Right now, we're doing the sort of media blitz and pushing the film out there because we're in the development phase of the film. So we're taking this time to write grants and to look for funding so that we can do something really high quality and something that could stand the test of time. And so people can go to amplifierfilms.ca/Red Road, and they can donate to our fundraising campaign or put us in touch with groups or organizations that are willing to fund these films. As many people know, films about Palestine, no matter how well they do in terms of accolades and awards, have a hard time finding distribution, let alone funding. If people think about No Other Land, that won the Oscar, it won the Academy Award, and still cannot find a distributor in the United States. It tells you the atmosphere of fear that anybody who speaks about this has to live under. And of course, we refuse to be silenced, and we will make this film in the way that we know how to do it. And if it means doing it little by little with small donations, then that's the way it's going to be. As Clifton mentioned, people who donate above a certain amount can get a keffiyeh that was donated by Aladdin, the merchant that Clifton met in Bethlehem.
And we're certainly going to link to the Amplifier website and Red Road to West Bank in the show notes, so our listeners will have an easy time finding that. Clifton, any final thoughts? Anything you want our listeners to take away from this interview with?
Well, I think Frank summed it up pretty good. I would just add that appreciate having the platform to speak about this film. Like to see it beyond anything, even if we don't raise that money, the film's going to get done nonetheless, because it just has to get done.
Well, and our listeners will definitely hear from both these gentlemen again, because I was talking before we started recording. I really want to hear more from Frank about Vieques and Puerto Rico, and I really want to hear more from Clifton about the Oka crisis, which he lived through and was an activist during. So Frank and Clifton, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being so generous with your wisdom and your lived experience. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Joel.
If
Thank you very
Jesus
much.
Christ came
Appreciate
back today like you threatened he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Yeah, who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well,